Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. U.S. President Donald Trump says the ceasefire is on life support after he rejected Iran's latest proposal to end the war and said the U.S. is ready to restart the suspended Project Freedom operation. Meanwhile, Iran warned that its armed forces are fully prepared to respond to any aggression. Defense chiefs of South Korea and the United States met in Washington and discussed major security issues, including alliance modernization. They reaffirmed the alliance and agreed to strengthen cooperation on the transfer of wartime operational control. The Blue House says it strongly condemns last week's attack on a South Korean cargo ship in the Strait of Hormuz, as authorities continue to investigate who was behind the attack, after confirming that an unidentified aircraft caused the fire aboard the vessel. U.S. President Donald Trump has some stern words for Iran, calling the ceasefire between the two countries unbelievably weak. He also described Iran's peace proposal as a piece of garbage and said he is ready to restart the suspended Project Freedom operation. Our Kim Bo-kyung tells us more.
U.S. President Donald Trump has described the month-long ceasefire between the U.S. and Iran as being unbelievably weak and on massive life support. Trump made comments in response to questions from reporters in the Oval Office on Monday. He also referred to a peace proposal from Iran as totally unacceptable and a piece of garbage.
After reading that piece of garbage they sent us, I didn't even finish reading it. They said, I'm not going to waste my time reading it. I would say it's one of the weakest right now. It's on life support. They understand.
Underlining that Tehran cannot have a nuclear weapon, he claimed that Iran had agreed to hand over its highly enriched uranium to the United States and that the U.S. was one of the only countries that could remove it, but later changed its position.
So we talked about it, and they said, you'll have to take it out because we don't have the capability of doing it. We were going to go with them, but they changed their mind because they didn't put it in the paper.
Earlier on the same day, the U.S. president told Fox News that he was considering resuming the suspended Project Freedom operation. The news outlet reported Trump as saying that guiding U.S. military ships in the Strait of Hormuz would be a small part of a larger military operation, though he had not made a final decision yet. In response to pressure from Trump, Iran said he had completed preparations for all possible countermeasures. Mohammad Bahir Ghalibaf, who led the Iranian delegation in the ceasefire negotiations, wrote on X on Monday night that Iran's armed forces are fully prepared to respond decisively to any aggression, and that Iran is fully prepared for every option and that the response would be surprising. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
The Blue House has strongly condemned last week's attack on a South Korean container ship in the Strait of Hormuz, having confirmed that an unidentified aircraft was the cause of the recent fire on the container ship. Seoul is now still learning about who is behind the attacks. Our Yoon Jung-min reports.
The day after a set of attacks was identified as the cause of the recent fire on a South Korean cargo ship stranded in Hormuz, National Security Advisor Wi Sung-nak sent out a strong condemnation.
Our government strongly condemns any attack on civilian ships, including HMM Namu, as it is not justifiable or acceptable.
The Korean government has confirmed that attacks by two unidentified aircraft were behind last week's fire on the cargo vessel. It is still learning about the details, including the source of the attack.
Given the pattern of the damage and the hemispherical-shaped area of penetration, the chances of a mine or torpedo attack appear to be low.
The chief advisor added that Seoul will take a further look into the origin of the launch, as well as the exact type and physical size of the objects. We added that Seoul will double its efforts to secure the safety of Korean sailors and vessels near the strait, and continue its efforts to join an international move to guarantee the safety of all vessels and freedom of navigation. A senior-level official at the top office noted that the authorities are not at the stage of specifying the origin of the attack, and appropriate levels of measures will be taken after the probe is concluded. When asked about any involvement by Iran, the official said it's in an unknown area. On U.S. President Donald Trump accusing Tehran of firing at the Korean ship soon after the incident, the senior Blue House official added that they have communicated with Washington, but it remains unclear on what grounds Trump has made such a statement. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Starting next week, South Korea will launch the second round of high oil price relief payments for the bottom 70% of income earners, with support up to 250,000 Korean won, depending on region and eligibility. Our Cho Young-eun has the details.
The South Korean government will begin distributing a second round of high oil price relief payments starting May 18. The government moves to ease the financial burden caused by soaring fuel prices and rising living costs amid the Middle East crisis. The support programs targets the bottom 70% of income earners, covering around 36 million people nationwide. Under the government's region-based support policy, eligible residents in the Seoul metropolitan area will receive 100,000 won, or about $68. Those living outside the capital region will receive 150,000 won, while residents in areas facing population decline may receive up to 200,000 won. Special support regions will receive the maximum payment of 250,000 won.
The impact of the Middle East war is affecting not only vulnerable groups, but also ordinary and middle-class households, requiring more proactive fiscal support. Accordingly, the government plans to provide a second round of high oil price relief funds to ease people's financial burdens and support economic recovery.
Eligibility will be determined based on health insurance premium records from March, as individuals with high-value assets or significant financial income will be excluded from the program. The application and payment period will run for about 7 weeks through July 3rd. Those who are eligible for the first round of payments but have not yet applied will also be able to do so during the same period. The high oil price relief funds will be limited to use within the local jurisdiction tied to each recipient's registered address. Recipients may choose to receive the payments through credit cards, debit cards, local gift certificates, or prepaid cards, and use them at affiliated stores with annual sales of 3 billion won or less. As with the first round, the funds must be spent by August 31st, with any remaining balance to expire afterward. Restricted businesses include online shopping platforms, entertainment and gambling-related establishments, and cash equivalent businesses in line with restrictions commonly applied to local gift certificate programs. Cho Young-eun, Arirang News.
And now for a closer look at the rollout for the Korean government's second round of relief payments, we're joined today by Professor Shin Myung-gyu, Associate Professor of Economics at Yonsei University. Professor Sam, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
So some say the relief fund could help boost consumer spending, while others are worried about the growing fiscal burden. What's your take on this policy?
I think the policy can provide some short-term support to the economy, especially as households continue to face higher fuel and living costs due to the prolonged conflict in the Middle East. For lower and middle-income households, these relief payments could help ease some of the immediate financial pressure and support consumption to a certain extent. However, we also need to note the size of the payment. For example, for a single-person household, the payment amounts to roughly 4 to 10% of monthly median income, depending on the amount they receive. So it is probably not large enough to fundamentally change the overall consumption level, but it could still provide meaningful short-term relief for fuel, transportation, and utility costs that households have to pay. And also, at the same time, concerns about the fiscal burden are also understandable. Korea is already facing growing fiscal pressures due to population aging and slow economic growth. So this kind of repeated large-scale cash support measure may raise questions about long-term sustainability of the government budget. So overall, I would describe this policy as a kind of the reasonable short-term stabilization measure, but it should remain temporary and targeted rather than becoming a permanent policy approach.
I see, and that policy is aimed at addressing the economic fallout from the Middle East conflict. And because of that, more broadly, global food prices climbed last month to their highest level in more than 3 years, with vegetable oils particularly high due to the Iran war. So how might this affect consumers in South Korea, and could it also influence the direction of economic policy?
Yeah, the rise in the global food prices is likely to add further pressure to household living costs in Korea, especially because Korea depends heavily on imported food and energy-related inputs. And also, vegetable oil prices have increased sharply due to the Iran war and higher transportation costs. And that can raise the inflation because although the CPI weight of vegetable oils themselves is not exactly large, but the broader food category accounts for roughly 13% of Korea's CPI, and processed food prices are particularly sensitive to increase in vegetable oil and transportation costs. So the impact can spread quite broadly across everyday consumer prices, and the impact is likely to be felt more strongly by lower-income households because food and energy account for a large share of their spending. And also, higher food prices could also complicate the monetary policy. Even if economic growth slows, the Bank of Korea may find it difficult to move toward rate cuts because inflationary pressure can remain elevated because of all the concerns that we discussed.
And in the stock market, it's been less than a week since the Kospi surpassed 7,000 points, but it's already nearing 8,000 this morning. And some say it could reach 10,000 by the end of the year. What's your take on these forecasts?
Yeah, the recent rally and the Kospi index certainly reflects improving market sentiment, particularly around semiconductors, AI-related investment, and expectations that the global tech cycle may recover further. Also, expectations for lower global interest rates and strong foreign investment inflows may have also supported the financial market. So in that sense, the consensus is not entirely disconnected from the fundamentals of the current economy. However, I would still be cautious about very aggressive forecasts such as 10,000 by the end of the year. Financial markets often move ahead of the real economy, and when expectations become overly optimistic, volatility can also increase quite quickly. In particular, Korea still faces several uncertainties, including slower domestic growth, geographical risks between Korea and South Korea, and questions about the sustainability of the global tech cycles. So while further upside in the Kospi index is certainly possible, I think the pace of the recent surge may be difficult to sustain indefinitely. Overall, I would say that investors should focus less on just numbers and more on whether corporate earnings and productivity improvements can continue to support the valuations over time.
And you mentioned how the current situation is making it harder for the Bank of Korea to move toward a rate cut. And analysts actually say the Bank of Korea could raise key interest rates in the second half of this year and are advising investors to keep more cash on hand and diversify their investment. So in times like these, what should investors be careful about?
I think the key thing investors should be careful about right now is the asset market volatility driven by different uncertain measures. Markets have recently been supported by optimism surrounding semiconductors, AI, and expectations of the global growth, as I discussed earlier. But at the same time, there are still significant risks, including geographical tensions, inflation pressures, and uncertainty about the interest rate by the Bank of Korea, as well as the federal fund rate. So if the Bank of Korea moves toward rate hikes in the second half of the year, borrowing costs could rise and financial conditions may become tighter. And in this kind of environment, I think the general advice of maintaining some liquidity and diversifying investment really makes sense. Holding sufficient cash gives investors more flexibility during the periods of high market volatility, while the diversification helps reduce exposure to risk in any single or any sectors. So, and also at the same time, I would also caution against reacting too strongly to short-term market movements or overly optimistic forecasts.
I see. All right, Professor Shim, thank you so much for your time and insight this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
South Korea and the United States are stepping up coordination on major alliance and security issues, including the transfer of wartime operational control and growing tensions in the Strait of Hormuz. Defense Minister An Gyu-baek met U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in Washington on Monday, where the two sides also discussed alliance modernization and regional security cooperation. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
South Korean Defense Minister An Gyu-baek met U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth in Washington on Monday as the allies coordinated on major security issues, including wartime operational control transfer, alliance modernization, and tensions in the Strait of Hormuz. The Pentagon meeting marked the first defense ministers' talks between the two countries in more than 6 months. During opening remarks, Hegseth stressed the importance of allied unity and burden sharing, referencing the recent U.S. military operation against Iran.
The strength of our alliance is critical, and we look to our partners to stand shoulder to shoulder with us.
He also praised South Korea's pledge to increase defense spending and take on a larger role in defending the Korean Peninsula. An voiced support for the Trump administration's peace through strength policy and said Seoul is also boosting defense spending and military capabilities to strengthen South Korea-led defense on the peninsula.
In line with this, we are also making every effort to secure core national defense capabilities through measures such as increasing defense spending so that we can realize the defense of the Korean Peninsula led by us.
In a joint statement, both sides said that they discussed security on the Korean Peninsula and agreed to strengthen cooperation on key alliance issues, including the transfer of wartime operational control and alliance modernization. However, differences remain over the timeline for the transfer of wartime operational control. U.S. Forces Korea Commander General Xavier Brunson recently suggested early 2029 as a possible target date, while the Lee Jae-myung administration is reportedly aiming for completion before the end of its term in 2028. Other sensitive issues believed to have been discussed include cooperation on nuclear-powered submarines, North Korea-related intelligence sharing, and maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz following the attack on the South Korean cargo ship HMM Namu. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
U.S. President Donald Trump's delegation for this week's summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping is expected to include a number of top American technology and finance executives. According to the U.S. media on Monday, citing White House officials, Tesla and SpaceX CEO Elon Musk, Apple CEO Tim Cook, and Boeing CEO Kelly Ortberg will accompany Trump during the visit to Beijing. Executives from Goldman Sachs, BlackRock, and Citigroup are also expected to join the delegation. The visit comes as several U.S. firms pursue major business opportunities in China. The White House says trade and investment issues will also be discussed during the summit. However, Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang was not invited to join the delegation.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. As U.S. pump prices hit their highest level since 2022, President Trump said on Monday he supports suspending the federal gasoline tax code till it's appropriate. Suspending the 18-cent per gallon federal tax requires an act of Congress. The tax currently generates around $2.5 billion a month in road funding. Lawmakers from both sides have pushed for the tax to be suspended. Energy analysts said the move is unlikely to have much impact, warning that as long as the Strait of Hormuz remains closed, consumers will barely notice as pump prices will keep climbing regardless of the tax cut. The final 6 passengers on the hantavirus-hit cruise ship have now disembarked. Spain's health minister declared the evacuation complete on Monday, and the MV Hondias is now heading from Tenerife to the Netherlands. A recommended 42-day quarantine for all passengers begins, but new hantavirus cases among the evacuated passengers are raising fresh concerns. A French passenger whose condition is deteriorating, 1 Spanish national and 1 American have all tested positive since leaving the ship. A second American is showing mild symptoms. In total, 7 cases of the Andes strain of hantavirus have now been confirmed, with 2 further suspected cases. So far, 3 people in total have died. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa made a televised address on Monday where he refused to resign after a constitutional court ruling last week revived impeachment proceedings against him. This follows the Farmgate scandal in which thieves stole hundreds of thousands of dollars in foreign cash hidden inside a sofa on his private game farm. The scandal came to light in 2022. Ramaphosa said nothing in the court's ruling compels him to leave office and pledged to defend himself. His ruling ANC party called an emergency meeting for Tuesday to decide on its next move. The U.S. state of Texas is suing Netflix. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton accused the streaming giant on Monday of secretly collecting user data, including children's viewing habits without consent, selling that data to advertisers, and deliberately designing its platform to be addictive. Texas claims Netflix told consumers for years it did not collect data or share user data, but was actually tracking and selling viewer habits to data brokers. The lawsuit also targets Netflix's autoplay feature, calling it a deliberate tool to keep users, including children, locked to their screens. Netflix said the lawsuit was without merit and said it complies with privacy laws everywhere it operates.
Spring rain is making a dramatic entrance today, with strong rain clouds heading eastward across much of the country. The strongest rain bands this morning are centered over Chungcheongdo and Jeollado provinces, with heavy rain advisories being issued for parts of Jeollanam-do province. So Jeollado provinces could see up to 70 millimeters of heavy rainfall along with thunderstorms. Chungcheongdo province and Jeju Island might receive 10 to 50 millimeters of showers. Meanwhile, the capital area might see some spotty rainfall during the day today. And the rain will continue on and off through late this afternoon along with thunderstorms. The capital area will be under sunnier skies today with warmer highs than yesterday, getting up to 23 degrees Celsius here in the capital, but Chuncheon will be getting up to 22 degrees. Southern provinces, however, will be cooler along with the clouds and rain, getting up to 24 degrees in Daegu, Gyeongju, Daejeon, Gwangju will make it to 23 degrees Celsius. Now the cooler break, however, will be short-lived. Skies will clear beginning tomorrow and temperatures will climb rapidly once again. And by Saturday, the temperature here in Seoul could soar to 30 degrees Celsius, marking the hottest day of the year so far.
That's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.